1935, the Lions win the NFL championship. The Detroit Tigers take the World Series. The Red Wings bring home Lord Stanley's Cup. Joe Louis begins his rise to world domination. This transforms the Motor City into Detroit, City of Champions.
There it is, crack of the back, smack of the leather. We're off on another episode of Detroit City of Champions, the big 5-0, baby.
Episode 50, halfway to a century mark.
That is it. I'm Jamie Flanagan.
Charles Avison.
And talking about the trilogy of books and all the stories inside of them, it's Detroit City of Champions, a trilogy of books, a forthcoming movie from the screenplay.
Coming soon.
And we've been talking Joe Louis the last 12 episodes.
13
on,
the 13th one, yep.
Yep, on Joe Louis. And the subtitle throughout the 12 episodes has been the greatest individual season
in American sport history.
In American sport history.
Yeah.
And more than once throughout these episodes, you said, and I'm going to make that case.
I've been saying it from the very beginning. I've been saying it since I wrote the books. And I'm this particular episode.
Charles, today's the day.
Today's the day. And I'm like,
make that case.
Like, one of the reasons I even wanted to do this show from the very beginning was for today, just to get to today's show.
Right.
I'm like, I couldn't be more excited. I spent all day working on this particular episode. I spent a lot of work, I spent a lot of work on the chapter. I mean, this is straight out of the book. I mean, really all I did was underline some stuff I wanted to use today. But because it's kind of an interesting story of how this sort of evolved, because I wrote the first book, which was the story of the season. And when I was working on the second two books, the first book is the story, is like sort of the aerial view of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And the second two books focus on the players. Well, when I went to go work on the Joe Louis section, I was like, well, I already kind of wrote about Joe Louis's story in the first book.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not going to redo the same thing I just did.
Yeah.
So I was like, so what do I do for the Joe Louis? Like, what's the Joe Louis arc? And it's the strangest thing. It's just the strangest thing, because I was like, well, let's just mash through it and see what happens. And so I started writing. And so I was working on the Joe Louis, this Joe Louis chapter. And I think I was like 8 or 9, I think I was like maybe 10 pages in.
Okay.
And I just was not happy at all. I was not happy at all with the way it was coming out. It was almost like I was writing, and it was just everything I was writing. I'm like, it's just not flowing. It's not going well. It's just not the thing. Right. And so, like, just as I hit the save button or something on my computer at one point, like kind of finishing up the chapter.
Yeah.
My computer died.
No.
The computer died.
Karma's telling you this is garbage. Throw it out.
That's exactly. And so, like, my computer died. Like, I mean, almost to the exact keystroke was when I finished this.
Wow.
And so and at the time I was so broke. I mean, I could not I couldn't afford a new computer. I was lucky enough to have my neighbor across the hallway, named Kwame Beard. His nickname is Q, and he's a computer tech.
Yeah.
And so he, I was like, hey man, is there any way you
can bring out the Remington?
Yeah. So is there any way you can help me, with this computer and that? And he'd already done a little bit of help me. He's a really good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And so anyways, he was like, yeah, I can do it in my spare time.
Okay.
I'm really busy or not, I can do it in my spare time. And so anyways, so it took him it was probably a couple 2-3 months or something, because he had to replace the hard drive and all this different stuff. But in the meantime, it's like the long and short of it was, it shut down all writing of the Joe Louis chapter. And in essence, it shut down all writing altogether.
Yeah.
And so, and it was kind of like leading towards a busy Christmas season. Retail's Christmas is my busiest time of year. And so I basically put the entire writing of the book on hold, on ice for it was going to be about 6 to 8 months that I put the whole writing project on hold, because I didn't have a computer. And so it gave me more time to research, gave me more time to take notes, and it gave me time to think.
Yeah. And
it was just the strangest thing, because it was sort of like, once I got my computer going, it was like, okay, it's time to get going in that. And it was like, and it was weird, because it was like out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I was at an art show and I was doing my thing where I'm like, trying to sell a book. And I'm talking about this all the time. And it was sort of born out of a pitch, just as somebody I was talking to, that I was like, and I was saying it all the time. I was like, this was the greatest individual season in American sport history.
And
it takes place in the midst of the greatest overall season in American sport history. And it was like, and I was sort of thinking, I'm like, I've been saying this like the answer is right there, and I've been saying it like every weekend for the last like 5 years or 4 years, or whatever at that point. And I'm like, so I was like, that's it. I am going to make the case that Joe Louis in 1935 was the greatest individual season in American sport history. That's my arc for the Joe Louis.
Perfect.
And so you see what I'm saying? So it's almost sort of Providence or something looking out for me, saying, no, it's not right. We're shutting you down until you figure it out, But it was the crazy thing was it was always right there. It was always, if I just stopped and listened to my own self, I would have maybe known it earlier or whatever. But it gave me more time to gather way more information and actually kind of like take a break and really think about how I want to do it. And so that's when I got writing with that, sort of arc for this chapter, it basically wrote itself. It was one of the smoothest things I've ever written. And I couldn't be more thrilled the way it came out.
Oh, cool.
So with that being said, I've been a long time coming. I've been waiting to make this case because, you don't know how many, I think I'm not exactly a bestseller for books. I know I have some people that have bought and read the book, but this is a chance to actually put it on tape, or put it out of the, on the internet and say, this is the case, you see? And so I'm excited. And so, with that being said, so my sort of intro into this, we've talked about 1935 and that, but an initial search into, if you Google search the greatest individual seasons of all time.
Yeah.
Okay. You look for, there's all kinds of like top 100 greatest individual seasons. And it's just, there's all the greatest names, Michael Jordan, Babe Ruth, all these different great seasons by all these different athletes. And nowhere, Joe Louis of 1935 is nowhere on any list.
Jeez.
You will not see it on any list. I mean, the internet's a big place. Maybe some random corner that has something about Joe Louis. But in essence, there's nowhere, for all intents and purposes, what that either means is one, the story, the Joe Louis season didn't merit a ranking on the top 100,
sure,
or number two, people just don't know how great it is.
Right.
And that's where I believe it's the latter. I believe it's just people don't realize how great it was. And as such, that's why it's just not ranked. And so it's a big case to make, to say, despite the fact that it's not ranked on your sort of traditional top 100 lists, that it is not only should be amongst the top 100, but at the very top of the list.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like number one. And so that's where so it's an uphill climb. But I'm ready to make that, like I said, I'm ready to make that case. So, the first question that has to be asked whenever you're talking, when you say something is the greatest, right, is to define what the term greatest means. Because if it's just merely about statistics, if it's just like, oh, this person had 60 home runs, or this guy averaged 50 points a game, or this guy, did this, and there's, what's the parameters? It can't simply be statistics because because how do you compare different sports and how great something is or not? Yeah. And so the first thing that I did for this case, and that we need to do, is to define the parameters of what makes the greatest. And so that's why I have this little sort of list up on the screen, and I broke it down into 6 parts. Okay. And that's where we're going to take each part individually to sort of, and put it all together at the end. So the first point is going to be the statistical case. Mm-hmm. The second point is the obstacles that the athlete had to overcome.
All right.
Number 3 is how much did the athlete's status change from the beginning of the season to the end of the season? Like how much did they rise up in the world of sports as a result of this year, of their particular year? The fourth component is the timing. What did the season accomplish at the time it took place? Like, not just for that particular person, but was there external benefits to the city or to the, to his team or to whatever, at that particular moment in time? And then the fifth is, how did the achievements benefit the sport that athlete played? Like, did it change the game? Was it revolutionary in the world of that particular sport?
Okay.
And then number 6 is how much and we're talking about the greatest season in American sport history. Mm-hmm. So as such, how much did the season benefit American society or culture as a whole, if any? So those are the 6 sort of parameters that I use. And I use those exact same parameters for making the case for the greatest, that City of Champions itself, 1935-36 was the greatest overall season in American sport history. I use these exact same parameters for it. So anyway, So case number one. So point number one. We have a slide for each of the points.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first point to bring up here is that in entering 1935, Joe Louis. So the statistical case. So entering 1935, Joe Louis had a perfect 12-0 record, having been through 1934. Perfect 12-0 in his first year. With 10 of his victories coming by way of knockout of his first year. And so entering 1935, he was ranked according to there's a Ring magazine ranking too, but the one I have at hand for this that I use for this case is Damon Runyon's quote, because he was like one of the foremost writers and one of the biggest boxing fans there was back then. So Damon Runyon ranked, as he says in his thing, this is a little after the fact, but he says he actually, in his own words, at the beginning of 1935, the boxing experts of the United States ranked the division in this manner. And so I've got the list on the screen.
Yeah.
For those of you that can't see it, we've got Max Baer, number 1, Steve Hammes, number 2, Max Schmeling, number 3, Art Lasky, 4, Primo Carnera, 5, King Levinsky, 6, Patsy Peroni, 7, Tommy Loughran, 8, Lee Ramage, 9, and Joe Louis, 10th.
Okay.
So he's the 10th ranked boxer in the world entering into 1935.
And that's out of the Detroit Times.
So
back
that's
in February. Valentine's
Day.
Day.
Damon Runyon was a national. He was a highly respected sports writer,
Right.
and he was a national sports writer at the time. So so during this 1 year, Joe Louis would defeat 5 of those ranked boxers ahead of him, including knockouts of Max Baer and Primo Carnera,
Right.
both of whom were former heavyweight champions. Of his 14 fights in 1935, all of which he won, 12 were by virtue of knockout, meaning he not only won 100% of the fights, but had an astonishing 85% knockout rate.
Jeez.
All right. So 85%. I mean, there's literally, you can't, it's almost, it's difficult to get a higher success rate than 85% of knockout rate.
And these weren't,
pushovers. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are all the top 10 fighters in the world.
Yeah, these are serious fights, and
Mhm.
he's doing more than one a month.
That's exactly. Yeah.
That's grueling.
Yes. So, yeah. So,
How do you train in between?
well,
you know?
exactly. You're just
Yeah.
basically training like when you're on the train to the next fight, I mean,
Yeah.
that's really all you can do.
Whew.
So anyways, especially when he had some of the biggest fights of his career at the tail end of the year, and they're like, spending a month working on, training and that. So,
Yeah.
another statistic that is that helps to put some context around just how great he was in 1935, and I think I've alluded to it a little bit here and there, but I'll say it again. There's an award in 1935, but given out by the Associated Press, called the most outstanding athlete of 1935. It's basically like an MVP of sports.
Okay.
Leagues will have like most valuable player award, but in this case, it was this award could go to any athlete in any sport.
Oh.
In 1934, Dizzy Dean had won it, who was like the most, eccentric, super personality, dominant pitcher, in the world at that time. So Dizzy Dean had won it in 1934, and Joe Louis won it in 1935.
Wow. Okay.
But this is the statistic that I like to cite, is that in 1935, we mentioned it previously, that the Cinderella Man fight happens. So if anybody's seen the movie Cinderella Man, with Russell Crowe playing James Braddock, there's a movie Cinderella Man, it's directed by Ron Howard, and it's $100 million Hollywood movie. And so Cinderella Man it took place in June 13th, 1935. So Hollywood made $100 million movie based around this Cinderella Man fight. And it happens in the same year as this, right?
Jeez.
And so James Braddock, who is the subject of this movie, okay, he only garnered 3 votes compared to Joe Louis's 182 votes for most outstanding athlete of 1935. And they made an entire $100 million Hollywood movie, and it was like, and it's one of the great sports movies. It was a massive hit,
absolutely,
seen by many people, and so there's $100 million Hollywood movie that talks about, it's almost like a real life Rocky story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so you have a real life Rocky story filmed, $100 million Hollywood movie. And in their day, the voters thought so much more of Joe Louis that he got 182 votes compared to James Braddock only got 3. So that's how much excitement and interest there was in Joe Louis, that a guy who basically had a real life Rocky story only got 3 votes compared to what Joe did with 182. I mean, it's a complete rout.
Yeah.
So so as I'm saying, like, if there's a Joe Louis story, if that's $100 million Hollywood movie, what's this worth?
Oh, yeah.
You see? So anyways, those are some of the statistics, those are some of the statistics to lay out. Yeah. And so, okay, so that's like the sort of statistical case.
Yeah.
And so the part number 2 is the case point number 2 is obstacles to overcome. And so we did an entire episode about Jack Johnson. We talked a lot about the history of boxing, just really so that the viewer now can grasp the point that I'm about to make right here.
Okay, so there's an image for the people up on the screen. What is this?
That's
image?
Jack Johnson.
That's Jack Johnson.
Yeah.
He's wearing this like amazing.
It's a great. I love the photo. It's a cool photo.
Formal coat, and almost like a hat.
Yeah,
it's almost like a flat cowboy hat.
Yeah, it's a great picture.
Midnight cowboy hat. That amazing,
cool shot.
Amazing shot of Jack Johnson.
Yeah, and I thought he was I love Jack Johnson. I think he's great. He's a polarizing figure in his day, and in that. But
so the obstacles for Joe to overcome, Jack Johnson was a big part of that.
Was the long shadow. We talked about, we talked about, like I say, we devoted quite a bit of time to talk about the history of boxing, and also the long shadow cast by Jack Johnson, which is somebody that might be just catching up now. Jack Johnson was the first black heavyweight champion. But the problem, what happened was that he'd be more akin to like an NFL wide receiver of today.
Yeah.
Like he was getting his Keith Captain gold. He was very flamboyant. He was very, sort of outrageous personality. And so while, there's a, you could say, well, he can do whatever, it's a free country. He can do whatever he wants. And that's true. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I actually agree. Like I thought he was a pretty cool personality anyways, but there's no denying the impact of him having done so.
Yes.
And the impact of him having done so was that it created a mindset in the newspapers, which was no black man is ever going to do this to us again. There's not going to be somebody that, comes out and scandalizes and makes basically a joke of this sport world. And he has all eyes on him and uses it for, sort of like negative attention type of thing. So when Joe Louis came along in the 1930s, there was you're already your standard sort of segregation in the world of sports, but in the particular, when it comes to boxing, it was actually a double obstacle because Joe not only had to overcome the racial barrier, just the basic racial barrier, but also he had to overcome the hurdle of the previous experience of Jack Johnson. So it was a double thing that he had to overcome.
All right.
And so, and again, a lot of people realize, that there was segregation in sports in the 1930s, but few people realize just when that segregation began to change. And it was 1935 with the rise of Joe Louis that this particular, that this began to change, because Joe is the guy who we're going to see here is the one that opens the door for others to follow. And it begins the rise of Joe Louis begins in 1935 when he became a beloved sports figure in the world. So,
and not just for boxing, but there's so
just
many,
everything. Just he was a media person. Everybody loved him, whether you're a baseball writer. I mean, he was showing up in 1936. He showed up for opening day baseball game with the Tigers, and it was an impromptu. They pulled him out of the crowd and he threw out the opening day pitch of a Major League Baseball season, because he was that kind of beloved of a character. He was going to Red Wings games. I mean, he's every time anybody sees him, he's a beloved figure.
Yeah.
And so this is an obstacle. The obstacle that he had to overcome was absolutely massive.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that he had to overcome the fact that he was poor, which he was. He had to overcome the fact that he had no money for training or doing any of this, which he didn't. He had to overcome just the obvious barrier of his skin color, and then the additional barrier that even the biggest venues in the country wouldn't give him a shot because of the memories of the last black heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
And so he, it was a double racial barrier to overcome.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. So there's his obstacle to overcome, which is pretty significant.
Yeah.
So the next point point number 3, which is how much did the athlete's status change from the beginning to the end? And so we've already kind of gotten into this a little bit, but before 1935, Joe Louis You see, he was known in, inside the boxing realm.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of 1935, he's a household name, not just in America. He's an international superstar.
Yeah.
You know what it takes to become an international superstar in an era before like Twitter and all this, and even, I mean, talking pictures with sound were really only coming out in 1929. I mean, and you're talking about like movies. I mean, there's no TV. You're talking newspapers and in some basic movies with sound.
Yeah.
And within 12 months, he's an international superstar.
Mail takes 12 months to get around the world.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Like, look at the rise. He is
still takes 12 months to get around.
He's an unknown figure at the beginning of, I mean, he's fighting his first fight in 1935 was he fought as an undercard to Max Baer at Olympia Stadium.
Right.
He was, I mean, he was barely a draw. I mean, he was an up and comer within the boxing realm.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of 1935, it didn't matter whether you were into sports or not. You knew who Joe Louis was.
Right.
And so the couple images that we've got on this slide just kind of show what we're talking about here is, so I've got a boxing card, which is considered Joe Louis's rookie card.
Okay.
And the card itself is it's, I can't even pronounce the name, but it's a 1935 J.A. Petro, which is spelled with an X in the final letter, sporting events and stars card. But if you're interested, take a look on eBay and look up Joe Louis 1935 rookie card, and you'll see it. I mean, it's on there. But this is a sporting card. But I think there was 100 cards in the set. Okay. And it was mostly, when you look at the checklist of the cards, it's almost all British athletes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally, I mean, there's a couple other, the only other American that I really recognize on there was James Braddock was shown on there too.
Okay.
But anyways, so Joe Louis is pictured, but James Braddock had been around for a few years anyways. And he was also the heavyweight champion of the world, which is easy to say, oh, the heavyweight champ we're going to put on a card.
Yeah.
But Joe, like the fact that Joe Louis made it over on a British baseball card, a sports card in his very really first year. By the end of the year, he's in a major, he's in a baseball card set over in Britain. It shows you right there that he's already an international star,
right?
Because they're not going to put him on a card to advertise to put him on a baseball card if nobody knows who the heck he is.
Right.
So that's the first. So that's the first little picture in the image, and then the second picture is straight out of the book. And I actually there's a lot more I wanted to show with that picture because the photo is clipped out of a French sporting magazine. Okay. So there's no way you can see it even on the image we have, but at the very bottom, the text is all in French. And what it is a photo. This is a photo of Joe Louis training for Max Baer in 1935. And this is you can just see you can just see in the photo, it's just a small little pavilion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a small little wooden pavilion, and Joe's in the middle. You can actually see him boxing, and there's this massive throng of people just watching him spar and get ready for a fight. This is September of 1935. I mean, you can just see with your eyes, like he wasn't getting that kind of attention at the beginning of 1935. You can tell you that,
right?
So, I mean, he is a massive, massive name in only 12 months. So the idea of like how much of the status changed from beginning to end, it's 0 to 100.
Right.
I mean, it's a complete, he goes from the ground to Jupiter. He's an instant superstar. So I've got a great little quote here that I want to sort of incorporate this before we, move on to the next point. So this is from Bud Shaver, Detroit Times. So his name is Joseph Louis Barrow, a 21-year-old who 2 years ago was unknown outside of Detroit and little known here. In less than 2 years of professional fighting, he has so completely captivated the minds of fight fans, he is better known than the ruling heavyweight champion of the world, James J. Braddock. His marriage was front page news. When he buys a horse, his picture gets in the newspapers. Today, Louis is making tours of Canada and United States, drawing profitable crowds, while the white champion of the world sits back and waits for a match with him as the only profitable enterprise of his sovereignty. Why has this 21-year-old so completely captivated the interest of fight fans that they would rather see him in exhibitions than the champion of the world in a bona fide fight? The answer to that is not hard to find. There are two parts to the answer. Joe Louis is the best fighter in the world today and the best managed fighter in the heavyweight ranks have ever known. If you ask me today how good a fighter is, Joe Louis, he is the best of my time. I think he could have licked Dempsey. Dempsey was my ideal of a fighting man. At Lewis's hands, I fear Dempsey would have taken the worst licking a man ever took. That was November 13th, 1935.
Wow.
So there's Jack Dempsey. I mean, people that are listening, even if you're not even a boxing fan, you know you've heard of Jack Dempsey.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Dempsey was like one of I forgot the terminology, but in the 20s, it was called like the quintet. There was like 5 major sporting superstars of the 1920s, like Babe Ruth, Bobby Jones. I think Walter Hagen might've been on it. And then Jack Dempsey. I mean, Jack Dempsey was just a major superstar. He was an absolute beast inside the ring. And here's after 1 year, Bud Shaver, the Detroit Times is saying that Dempsey would have gotten rocked by Joe after only a year. You see, like, this is stratospheric heights from 0 to 100. So that's the next point. You know, each of these points, I think we're seeing a theme here, which is like answered. Not only are these points getting answered, like they're just like, oh yeah, it was pretty good. No, it's the maximum you can have for each of these points.
Yes.
Each of these points it cannot get any higher, you know? So anyways, so point number 5, actually, no, what was it? Yeah. What time to play? So point number 5.
I did get this. When you want it, we can do that.
Yeah. So, if you can zoom in on the Joe on that, if you want. Oh, whenever we're ready for it.
When you want it.
We're good. I don't even know if we're
number
it, so.
The timing, right, is the next one.
So timing. Yeah. We're not point number 4. Yes.
Timing.
So timing, what did the season accomplish at the time it took place? And so we have a couple of images up here on the screen. So the reason I asked this question is how did his accomplishments, how did this athlete I say this athlete because if anybody wants to make a counter case against Joe Louis's 1935 season,
right,
I'm laying out the case for this point by point. And if a person says I'm going to measure my case against this case, I think this athlete's better.
Sure.
Yeah. Either have a different, a different criteria, or add some more. But I think these are pretty fair questions to ask when establishing a parameter of the idea of the greatest of anything. I mean, they're pretty good criteria, I think. And so, this question here revolves around the idea of is what benefits was there besides just to that athlete? I mean, of course, the person that has an incredible season is going to make a ton of money, right? That's almost goes without saying. Yeah. But the question becomes is how much did it benefit anybody else?
Sure.
Okay. Or was there any benefit to anybody else? And so in this case, in the slide that we have on the screen, you can see with just using your own eyes, or for people that are just listening, Joe Louis, and we talked about a little bit in the last episode too, the community of Joe Louis, Joe, like I asked right here in the book, how much did it benefit others that the first universal African-American sports hero emerged in the middle of the Great Depression?
Right.
I mean, do you think there's any benefits for the local communities, not only in Detroit, but around the country to have the first, universal beloved Black superstar emerge in the middle of the Great Depression? Okay. I mean, that's a major thing. And so, so I got a little quote to show just how big Joe Louis was in 1935. So this quote this is actually out of the HBO Joe Louis documentary called America's Hero Betrayed. So it's actually I thought it was really good Joe Louis sort of documentary. But anyway, so this is by a man named Charles Rangel, who was a United States congressman out of Harlem, New York. And so he said, he grew up in the 1930s Detroit. 1930s New York. So, but he said, I didn't know any Blacks that could be proud of what they had accomplished, except the school teachers, the undertaker, the reverends. But as a kid, Joe Louis was everything. He was just the epitome of racial pride. And so, so that's somebody that lived during that era. And here's another one. This is out of Leo McDonnell, out of the Detroit Times. This is from, this is even in mid-year. This is June 24th, 1935. He says, Joe Louis's picture hangs in every barbecue, saloon, barbershop, and home in Harlem. So every single place, every single store, every single home, every single place had a picture of Joe Louis. And why, of course, would you want to put a picture of Joe Louis? Because you love him.
Like every house in Ireland's got a picture of the Pope and John F.
Yeah,
Kennedy.
there you go. Yeah, that's And so, but what I'm saying is because you're not just going to put it up there just because you kind of, I don't know, you got a picture of Joe Louis. Joe Louis, even in they talk about Joe Louis like in Coming to America and stuff in that barbershop. Like Joe Louis in a year, he was already, the fact that Leo McDonald and this is mid 1935,
Yeah.
Joe Louis' picture hangs in every barbecue, saloon, barbershop, and home in Harlem, every place by mid 1935. It wasn't even like November, December that he was big. Right. This is the middle of the year. Everybody's already looking at him as the superstar. Mm-hmm. You see? And so like I say, what does it mean? This is the middle of the Great Depression. It was incredibly difficult for everyone. Mm-hmm. For the entire country is going through the whole world's going through the great, the Depression. But in this, in this moment in time, this is the first universal black superstar, and he emerges at a time when they need it the most. You see, right in the midst of the Great Depression. Yeah. And so I say in the book, if it's short, the timing for the season to have taken place could not have been more perfect if it had been specifically chosen from a 100-year history of American sport. So the rise of Joe Louis in 1935 took place at the exact time the people who benefited also needed it the most. So the timing is essential. It's not like he just like it was in the roaring 20s and Joe came out of nowhere and everything was great. This is these people need a hero, and here comes Joe. You see, and so there's my timing. Once again, the theme is that every one of these points are, it can't be improved upon. You see, and so anyways, that's point number 4. Point number 5: how did the achievements benefit the sport being played? All right. And so let me I want to break out Richard Back. This is a little bit of a sayonara, bit of a,
because we've been relying pretty heavily on Richard Back. Yeah. It's a great collection of information.
Absolutely. Great Black Hope by Richard Back. It's a tremendous book. If anybody wants a great story on Joe Louis, especially like his early history. It actually in his book goes well beyond 1935. Right. This covers his entire life. It's and you want a great in-depth story. Richard Back is the dean of Detroit sports historians, and that includes myself. As much as I would love to say I'm top Detroit sports historian category, I definitely defer that title to Richard Back. So
we were talking about Joe and his status. We were the timing, the status before that, and we were talking about how he threw out that first pitch at a Tigers game. And he was at Red Wings games.
Yeah, he showed up.
And always. Chris was chiming in, and he wanted to know: do we know if Joe ever made it to a Lions game?
I don't have any direct evidence of that, but I can't imagine that he wouldn't have been because he was at. I've got him with actually in a photo of I've actually got him at a Red Wings game, and then him giving a quote about a great fight that happened during the game.
We talked. We hit that in one of the
Wally Kilrea. This fight with Wally Kilrea. So anyways, so I've got a little quote that I wanted to read, and it's a little bit of a, like I say, it's a little tip of the cap to, that we get to use Richard Back one more time.
Yeah. And this is talking about his achievements and how it benefited the sport.
Well, to set this up, I want to use Richard Back because he's got a great little couple sentences here to describe boxing in the 1930s when Joe emerged onto the scene. Okay. And so he really helps to set the stage. I talk about it too, but Richard Back's words are really good. So what there's several pages before that talks about all the different boxers of this era. In there, like I say, these are all, we're dealing with an era that, boxing had been around for many. We talked about how boxing went back a couple hundred years prior to this, but at this particular moment, boxing it had former heavyweight champions. It had some big mugs, like your big sort of, they had technique. These guys trained and all this.
Sure.
But there was no true superstar. It was like the heavyweight championship was going back and forth. And there was, there's rumors of people throwing fights, and there's, people that are shaving points and, going down around early, or whatever. Mm-hmm. The sport was certainly at one of the lower ebbs that it had ever been in. And it had been many, many years since the last, when there was Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney were fighting in the 1920s. They'd have these they call it the $1 million gate.
Yeah.
Where the promoters would yield $1 million in ticket sales. Those days were long gone. Okay. This was sort of the kind of fights where there would be some big ticket names, but you'd have to be sort of a boxing diehard to go to these kind of stuff. But so Richard Bax, so it's just to sort of back up what I'm saying. Richard Bax, kind of finishes off several great pages, talking about the era by saying frauds, clowns, stiffs, and bums. Such was the state of boxing as Joe Louis embarked upon his professional career. So frauds, clowns, stiffs, and bums. Such was the state of boxing as Joe Louis embarked on his career. So boxing at this moment it's on life support.
Sure.
This is the boxing that Joe emerges into. And as I mentioned, in 1935 with Joe Louis, when he fights against Max Baer, Max Baer. Keep in mind, Max Baer had lost the heavyweight championship to James Braddock in June of 1930 in 1935. Just a few weeks before Joe Louis fought Primo Carnera. So anyway, when Joe fought Max Baer in September 1935, Max Baer wasn't even the heavyweight champion anymore. Right. James Braddock was.
Yeah.
So when Joe, and that's right, and that's the reason that Joe was denied his shot at the title. Right. That's the only reason he didn't get a shot at the title was because of the Cinderella Man story. See, Max Baer had lost the belt. And so when Joe Louis fought Max, despite the fact that Max Baer was no longer the heavyweight champion of the world anymore,
right,
they drew the first $1 million gate since Tunney and Dempsey in the 20s.
Geez.
So it was $1 million. That's how big he was. Yeah. By September 1930, he's a virtual unknown in January, but by September,
and it wasn't even a belt fight.
And it wasn't even a title fight. Yeah. And it's $1
fight.
million gate. You see, so it wasn't
a belt fight. They were out there fighting.
So what I'm saying is that Joe Louis brought back enthusiasm to boxing.
Yes.
In boxing, like all sports, thrives on star power.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's this new star, there's this new superstar. And Joe, now they've got a guy that can market,
mm-hmm.
There's a guy you can market. So this is where it changes. Boxing it shifts. And this, now there's a superstar they can market. And the $1 million gate's been returned, and now they can start running all kinds of different fighters at Joe Louis. They threw so many different types of fighters at him, like these big, like 350 pounders, little short guys. They had, like little skinny guys that were trying to, dance around the ring on him. The guy that he fought at the end of 1935, his name is Paulo Uskudin, which they called him the Basque Woodchopper.
Oh.
And the guy's fighting style was a turtle style. He was purely defensive. Like you couldn't even land a blow on because he fought like a turtle. Like he was all bunched up. Purely defensive.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't even get a punch on
the
him.
Guy out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then he would come up with a couple shots here and there to try to stop you. But anyways, they brought every fighter against him, and Joe tore them all apart. And so now they could market. They're like, check this guy. Check out this guy we're bringing up against Joe. It's this big ex-barroom brawler. He got pounded. We're bringing this guy against him. So Joe rejuvenated the entire sport. And from after Joe Louis, you could no longer have these just sort of ex-barroom brawler types, with a knack for taking a punch. Now you had to be a legitimate scientist, a scientific, highly trained super athlete.
Right.
If you wanted to get in there, especially if you wanted to get in the ring with Joe.
Yeah.
So he saved the. I mean, you could say he saved the sport. I mean, boxing would have survived whether, I think without Joe. I mean, I hate to say without Joe, but I mean, it's not like it would have just died. So I hate to say that he saved it necessarily.
Sure.
But he revived it, certainly.
A major part of the
reinvigoration
there.
Yeah. Absolutely. He completely revived the sport, gave a whole new infusion of enthusiasm. And then from there on, all fighters completely had to raise their standard of fighting style in order to go against Joe. And of course, he set the bar very high for future boxers to say, I want to be, an athlete like Joe. I want to be, I got to be a technician. I got to be a hard puncher. I got to be all these things in order to be, in order to even to get in the ring with a guy like that. So he raised the bar. The sport was dramatically changed as a result of Joe Louis. And in all the rankings have Joe Louis, depends on which one you're looking at, but Joe's always ranked as one of the top 2 or 3, 1, 2, or 3 fighters of all time. and well deserved. So as I'm saying, so how did he, you know, how did the athlete's achievements benefit the sport being played? Massively. The short answer to that question. Massively. In every single fighter, I've got other articles that talk about how you drive through Detroit and there's all these kids that's like in the street boxing each other. Everybody wanted to be the next Joe Louis.
Right.
And so it was a whole new generation of boxers where, you know, boxing talent was born just because they all wanted to, you know, because Joe, they wanted to be like Joe, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, you know, so it was, the answer is massively did he benefit the sport he was being played. And so that's point number 5. And so the final point we get to is number 6. How much did the season benefit American society or culture as a whole? And so this brings up really one of the components of even why I even got into sports history.
Yeah.
Because before I even got into sports history, I've always liked sports, but I've always looked at it as, you know, relatively just basically like something I did when I drank beer or did whatever. I never looked at it as a serious profession for a historian to get into, honestly. I mean, if you would have asked me in college, I would have said I was getting into Roman history or something like this, you know, medieval history or classic history. You see, I never looked at sports history as like no serious historians can be a baseball historian or something. But that changed because especially really it changed with the City of Champions story, because it made me sort of ask the question, like, you know, are sports important? Are sports, like, you know, in many cases you're like, nah, it's just kind of something I do on the weekends. You know, you ask about rank and file fan, they're like, nah, not really. I just, you know, if my team wins, that's great. You know, it's sort of something to do and you're, you know, hanging out with your friends and that. But every once in a while, something comes along, some story, some athlete, something comes along that really has a massive impact, you know, outside the boundary of the sport in which they play. And one of the to sort of illustrate what I've got is the next slide we have on the screen, which is Joe Louis posed with Jesse Owens. And so most people or many people are familiar with the story of Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics, when he, like, you know, won all the, you know, I forgot exactly how many gold medals he won, but it was numerous, and, you know, kind of blew out the idea of Aryan supremacy and right in front of Hitler. So Hitler had to eat crow at his own Olympics because a black man was winning, you know, gold medals all over the place, which kind of blew out the idea of this Aryan supremacy. Right. And so the word, you know, from that point till now, that event has been celebrated as like the first blow against Hitler leading into World War II. Because if Hitler had dominated the Olympics, then he would have been using that as propaganda and fuel for his, you know, continuing, you know, escalation of his own, you know, people, like we are, you know, believe in this, you know, the Aryan, you know, the whole Aryan thing. So anyways, but a lot of times people don't realize Jesse Owens was not a shoo-in to even go to the Olympics in 1936. I mean, he's a black man in a segregated era.
Yeah.
Right. So but this photo on the screen is such perfect illustration of the impact of Joe Louis. This photo comes from 1935, and I have 2 of them. We showed another, I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago. We showed a different photo of Joe Louis. I actually had the date for that one. That I actually had that, I think it was July 24th, 1935. But this one here, I don't have the date for. Yeah, there we go. That's the other one. That one's dated. And so, actually the date's on the top of the photo. It is July
24.
I just recalled that off the top of my head. That's the first number in like 20 years I've ever recalled like that. Anyways, so Jesse Owens, because Joe Louis is so beloved, in 1935, they're able to, there's people that want Jesse Owens to go to the Olympics, but there's a hell of a lot of people that don't, because they don't want a black man representing America on the world stage like this, especially not over in Germany in this Aryan nation world they're building. And so anyways, so what they do is they bring Jesse Owens with Joe Louis, who's becoming a beloved figure in the country, so that they're like, just like Joe, Jesse Owens is beloved too. He's smiling for the cameras, as you can see in this photo. They're like, Jesse Owens is hopeful to go to the Olympics in 1936. And sure enough, he did. And why? I'm not going to say it was completely because of Joe, but it didn't help. It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt that that Joe is opening the door, you see? And so Joe Louis in 1935, he's opening the door for Jesse Owens Joe in 1935 has opened the door for Jesse Owens in 1936. But not only that, but he opened the door for Jackie Robinson for Jackie Robinson to break the color barrier in baseball.
Man,
because after World War II, the mentality was that a lot of people are like, oh, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier and Branch Rickey gave him the opportunity and this and that.
Mhm.
But a lot of times what sort of slips underneath the surface for the story is that there was the mood in the country was changing.
Right.
And there was a paradox that had been created. And the paradox was Joe Louis after World War II. Joe Louis, when Joe Louis won the heavyweight championship in 1937, he finally got the belt in 1937 from Braddock. And then he still had the belt after World War II. I forgot what year he lost. He finally basically gave up the belt. He never got beaten with it. But anyways, it was like through the 1951 or something. But Joe was the heavyweight champ for years. And so the idea was after World War II was that there was a paradox. There was, how can boxing, which is the most savage sport,
right,
also be the most progressive with regards to diversity
Mhm.
when Joe Louis has been we've had a black heavyweight champion in boxing for a decade.
Yeah.
But yet baseball is still segregated.
Sure.
And it's the American game. It's the American pastime.
Sure.
After World War II, that Joe Louis was a main component of that paradox where they're like, how is it possible? So he helped open the door. And when Jackie Robinson came along, Joe Louis said in his own book, I have the quote right here, Joe Louis had like his own little sort of biography,
Mhm.
autobiography, and somebody else written in that. So, but Joe actually, quoted in the book, he said, it felt real good when Jackie Robinson said that if it wasn't for me and Jesse Owens, he wouldn't be where he was.
Mm.
Joe Louis's own words. He's saying he felt really good when Jackie Robinson used to tell him that he would not have got his shot if it wasn't for Joe.
Right.
So, and of course, Jesse Owens, Joe cites Jesse Owens right there too. Because, so Joe Louis and Jesse Owens are the sort of the pioneers. But where did it begin? It began in 1935 with Joe Louis.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people go, well, no, it was 1930. A lot of times people's first memory of Joe Louis is the 1930 fight against the Nazi Max Schmeling, right?
Right.
So that's where a lot of people's memory begins. But that was not till 1938.
Yeah.
That was 3 years after this. Joe might not have even had a shot. Joe was already the heavyweight championship by 1938. He was already done all this stuff before 38.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, 1938, that signature moment against Schmeling was such a major story that it completely overshadows everything that Joe Louis did before.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. But he, so 1935, this is the foundation upon which all of the other things that Joe did, all of it was built on the foundation of what he did in 1935. So how much did the season benefit American society or culture? Top of the heap.
You can't. Yeah.
What other person can match what Joe did in the world of sports for how the season benefited American society or culture?
Yeah. Nobody.
Is there a cricket in the background somewhere?
Yeah.
There's nobody.
Yeah.
So these are, every single one of these components. I invented the criteria for this, but like I say, I like to think it's a pretty good criteria.
I think
I think I covered all the bases of it. So yes, so Joe Louis and every single thing that and all these, in every single one of these components, maxes out each of these, every single thing you're looking for. So yeah, that's my case. I do have a summation that I wanted to read to sort of finish off my little thing. I don't know how much time we got, or if I'm running over or short, or if you wanted to say anything or whatever.
No, you can do that. And I'm going to bring up that picture from the one Detroit Times.
Yeah.
It's
so what's
really
great is
nice.
the reason I wanted to show this. Is there a way to zoom in on the bottom left corner?
I will. Yeah. So you can just start talking and I'll zoom in.
Yeah. So what I want you to see when you look at the bottom left-hand corner, this was the city. We call this the City of Champions, or Champions Day newspaper. This newspaper came out after the first Champions Day by the Detroit Free Press. It would have been, it was a huge spread of a newspaper. So there's actually two panels there. So the full newspaper size is 36 inches wide. So it was massive. And so this is there's only I would say 4 of these known in existence, and I own 3 of them, originals. But this is in the books. These are all in the books. And anyways, the bottom left-hand corner, what's so fascinating, this newspaper came out. It's my favorite, iconic thing it's my favorite newspaper of all time. It's my favorite collectible of all time. But you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of this newspaper, Joe Louis is number one. Joe Louis is the biggest photo of any in the entire page. And at the bottom of the photo of him, this came out April 19th, 1936. And it says in the bottom, Joe Louis, when this is a celebration of all the, 21 of the 33 championships that had happened in 1935. And on Joe Louis's little section there, it says Joe Louis, world's uncrowned heavyweight champ. Uncrowned. They say it in the paper. Like he was so expected to win the championship that the current champion, meaning James Braddock, was merely a custodian of the belt until Joe Louis had the time to take it from him.
Yeah.
Until the opportunity arrived. He was the uncrowned heavyweight champ. Like, I mean, that's a bold claim to make about somebody that they were going, like, they already have him going, well, we already know he's going to be champ, so let's feature him on the City of Champions. He was the only one. Joe was the only person. And when you say 33 championships in 1935, I don't include Joe Louis amongst that number. He did not even finish the year as heavyweight champ.
Right.
But he was the uncrowned champ. That's for damn sure.
Is. Yeah.
So anyways, he was listed on the papers. So anyways, I just want to finish off and read I guess read my own quote, a quote from my own book, the summation of my case in the book. Just so that people, like I say, I don't know how many people have read my books or will read the books or whatever, but it's a chance to put down my summation from print into digital format onto the internet, and sort of read my piece. So this is, to quote myself, this is book 2. It's the volume 1 of the Players, the second book I wrote, in the summation for my section on Joe Louis, then putting a little bow on why this 1935 Joe Louis was the greatest individual season in the history of American sport. So the rise of Joe Louis in 1935 was the most remarkable individual season in the history of American sport, especially when one looks beyond the mere statistical analysis of what makes a season great. Comparing various sports, athletes, and eras can lead to endless speculation, but in this case, how can there be any argument? Dominating his sport in a single year to such a degree that he was universally regarded as greater than the champion who technically sat on the throne above him is even further enhanced by the idea that he had to overcome the obstacle of his mere skin color in order to do so. From an obscure athlete to an international superstar in less than 12 months, he inspired a generation who needed a hero more than at any other time in their history. How much can one quantify the great gift of being able to dance in the streets in the midst of misery, i.e. the Great Depression? In a single year, Joe Louis changed the mentality of the media, saved his sport, ushered in a new era of boxing, and opened the door for future athletes of color to follow. In arguing a greater individual season, what other athlete demonstrated the true power of sport itself to cause such positive social and cultural change? Much like the story of the City of Champions season, the rise of Joe Louis in 1935 was dwarfed by his own ensuing achievements, separated from the modern day by World War II, and then eclipsed by a memory of a signature pre-war moment. In most people's minds, the story of Joe Louis begins with his fight in 1938 against the Nazi Max Schmeling. The real story actually begins 3 years earlier with the greatest individual season in the history of American sport.
Wow.
There you go. Should I drop the mic?
I think you made your
should
point.
It's gonna take this mic off so I can drop it.
There you are.
So that's my case. So now the benefit of being able to lay this out like this, Jamie, is when I say this is the greatest individual season.
Go to episode 50.
Exactly. And somebody's like, no, it wasn't. No, episode 50, go check it out. And it's a nice little round number too. Episode 50. We know exactly which one it is. So as I'm saying, so I don't have to, go through it every single time for any kind of a debate. I'll just point at the YouTube. I'll go point at it.
There it is. You have it playing on a loop in the store there.
Yeah. So like I say, there's a ton of great seasons. You're looking at the top 100 list. You're like, oh man, that was a great season.
Yeah.
But what season is there? I mean, you probably don't have an encyclopedic mind of the top 100 seasons, but can you even imagine of a season that would be greater than this?
The impact and
So the thing is, the thing that puts the sort of the icing on the cake for this thing is I haven't made the case for the City of Champions season itself, the 35 to 36 season, to make a case that this was the greatest. What I say in the book is even a little bit more sort of brash. I say not only is 1935 the greatest season that ever has happened, I'm saying it's the greatest season that ever will happen, right? Which is a bold prediction, especially the fact I can't see the future, right? So how can you say it's the greatest season that ever will happen? Well, if the case is successfully made that Joe Louis 1935 was the greatest individual season in American sport history, what that means is that the greatest overall season features the greatest individual season within its contents.
That is it.
Thus, if anybody else ever wants to make a case that a singular season from their city was ever a better sports season than what happened in 1935-36, if anyone was ever wanted to make the case that no, our season this year was a better year, where's your greatest individual season? Who are you going to put up against Joe Louis?
Yeah, there's no, you can't.
Nobody.
It's.
Yeah, you would have to have a season better, more impactful and better, and more massive than what Joe did in the midst of your season that you're trying to say was better than 1935.
And I just love these stories. I liked how much time we spent with Joe, and there's so much more.
I think we did pretty good credit to him, man. We really took our time going through them. And anybody's been following along when they worked through all the first 12 episodes. By the time you get to this 13th episode, you should, I think people are, that are going to be well familiar with the different concepts we talked about, because and that was kind of why we went through it the way that we did. Was I wanted to lay the groundwork for all this stuff and to make that case. And hell, that every single of the 13 episodes we did on this, instead of right in the top, the greatest individual season in American sport history, that it was like, and there's like quotation, like there's like a subheading underneath it, but that was the main header. Was that like, so we weren't trying to hide the fact that this is where we were going with it.
So I want to thank everybody for hanging out, joining us, being with us, and coming along on the way. And let me say it, Chris said it. Let me say it, beautifully done.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chris. And good to talk to you, man. Good to see you. And Chris is our guy. Chris, we just reconnected him. I want to bring him onto a show because Chris is the guy that started the Wikipedia page.
Oh, fair play.
Yes. Well, we worked on it together. I gave him a lot of the information for it, but he's the one that built that Wikipedia page. And the thing is, but where it's gotten, I haven't even looked at it in a while, but the thing that's so fascinating about the Wikipedia page it's the Champions Day Wikipedia page. Yeah. In the from where we started at, it was relatively, relatively small. But from where it's to where it's grown today, anybody that's interested, go take a look at the City of Champions. It's a Champions Day Wikipedia page. And this thing is like massive, because what it does is anytime one of these libraries puts all their files online, it just sucks in that information from some, like out in Kansas or something. It'll grab some random newspaper article and attach it to the Champions Day Wikipedia. So it's grown to be this. It's huge. I mean, it really is huge. So Chris beautifully
done all around.
What's that?
Beautifully done.
Yeah, so I want to bring Chris on there to one of these days, and we're going to set up an episode to talk with him and dive into it a little bit. And we'll just we'll talk with him. And we'll actually kind of go to the Wikipedia page and explore some of the kind of cool stuff on there. Which, like I said, I haven't even looked at it in a while, but every time I look on it, there's something else. I'm learning from the page that we started. Chris is the one that did the technical, and I did the that threw a lot of the info at it.
Like V'ger coming back. All right, so subscribe, leave a comment, collect all the different things that you can do when you're listening to a podcast or watching on YouTube. Subscribe, ringing the bell, all those things. We appreciate those. Comments are gorgeous as well. We appreciate all of those. cityofchampions.com,
episode 50, greatest season,
one-stop shop. And subscribe, follow us on the social medias, and we'll do it again next time. So put them up.
Nailed it. Right on cue.